Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the next webinar in the CoreX Legal series. For those of you who haven't heard, also that name is changing. CoreX Legal, we just, as of last week, November 1st, merged with an intellectual property law firm in New York City called Bachner Law. So going forward, you will probably see things that say CoreX Legal powered by Bachner. We're excited about this opportunity. We immediately grew overnight. Collectively now by the end of the year, the firm will be 30 lawyers and about 40 people and do a lot. One of the big things we added through this was patent work, both in the preparation and filing and also the dispute resolutions around that. We were not really equipped to do litigation. We now are. So we expanded greatly our ability to serve entrepreneurs, and we're maintaining our model around fixed fees and things like that. None of that has changed, just the letterhead, same people. And so we look forward to sharing more of that with you in the future. And for today, we are excited to talk about what I think is one of the most important topics in business that a lot of business owners and especially entrepreneurs, because early stage we're focused on our products and our solution. It's people. We label this HR, but this is really about people, and we all know the importance of people and the right people and how we develop our people and how we build systems for our people. But again, tends to end up on the back burner, and we're bringing it to the front burner. So today I'm excited to introduce you to Danielle Bodalski from Philatimo HR. I met Danielle about a year ago and immediately said, wow, this is not your everyday HR person. She's an amazing person, amazing leader, and is here to share some tidbits of her wisdom today. The process today is real clear. Danielle's going to present to us. She's open to questions while we're going, so feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand. I will keep an eye on the chat, and as usual, we'll probably have a question or two for Danielle as well. So welcome, Danielle, and load us up with some wisdom,
Oh,
some
goodness.
people
Yeah.
wisdom.
Everybody ready for the sauce? No, thank you for the introduction, Jeff. Just a quick note, basically over the course of the last year, as I've launched the company, really focusing on organizational design within the HR processes, working with companies that are what I like to call triple bottom approach. So looking at their people, looking at the profits, and looking at planet from a sustainability standpoint. And so that's really kind of the core of you'll hear some of the themes go through the slideshow today. So to, just a quick plug. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Adam Grant, but I feel like his work is reflected in half of the things that I do. And thinking about how HR can interact with an organization, putting people in a group doesn't make them a team. We've all been in a situation, or most of us have been in a situation where the team isn't quite working together, or you're a fan of a team that is really cohesive and working towards the same goals. And so Adam Grant kind of succinctly says that and makes some distinctions about a team versus a group. And those threads will kind of play throughout, well, I hope they play throughout the presentation today. To start off with kind of a little bit of a landing spot. When we think of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of people that fit into that category. A solo entrepreneur like myself, something like Jeff, where they started off with a handful of people, and now, as he just mentioned, they've doubled or more than doubled in size. But really, when I'm talking about kind of HR being the secret sauce, it's talking about companies and entrepreneurs that are focused on job creation. They're looking at the economic impact that their company is going to have. And there's some personal satisfaction in it. And generally, as you can look at the number from the SBA, the census, almost, I think it's 47.1% of companies fall between 499 and less than 20 employees. It's a pretty significant number, and that's really kind of the focus of who I'm going to be talking to. You could have a couple people, you could have up to the hundreds. Most of the organizations that I'm familiar with are not there yet, but thinking about building core HR strategies to support that growth is the focus of this. How many of you have seen this, right? The reality of businesses and entrepreneurs actually being successful in the organization or within growing the business. 20% are gone after year one. Um, in the last year, I really heard a lot about get through year one. And then once you get through year one, you get through year three, and then it's really year seven. And while those things are important, there's been a lot of work and studies in terms of what makes companies successful 10 years plus. And so I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but wanted to think about when you're launching a business, where do you spend time, energy, and effort? You know, and thinking about the marketing plan. See, Josh, here, from a marketing perspective, how do you do the ROI on that? What type of website do you have? From a product perspective, what's unique about it? What are the competitions? What's your pricing strategy? How are you going to go to market? Who's going to be handling the finances? So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of time, energy, and effort that goes on that. The past year, when I've talked to individuals, they're a little bit lost on the HR side of things. What are you doing from a people perspective? And I talked to them about recruitment and growth strategies and making sure the compensation is aligned. And largely what I come back to is, okay, yeah, but I don't understand what you could do for me. So I'm hoping to talk through some of those and really put an emphasis on why you need to think about your HR strategy, not at a certain decision point, whether it's when you get to 5 people, 10 people, or whatever case, but how does that ecosystem, the foundation of HR, really is really impacted from the get-go. And I couldn't find a really solid data point on this, but most of the time in looking at how entrepreneurs make mistakes, there's something in there about their people strategy. So this one, by way of example, out of the 8 items that they identified as mistakes, 3 of them have something to do with people. You could argue a little bit more, but ultimately, hiring the wrong people and not spending time with your people and not crystallizing those roles and responsibilities lead to failure in the business. So bringing it to HR, the perception and the reality, and please feel free to raise your hand in the chat. When I've told people that I work in HR over the past course of 8 years, give or take, the look on people's faces is not one of like, wow, you work, yeah, that's cool. You're a lawyer or you're whatever, you're a finance person, you're a CPA. It's almost a little bit of a, ooh, thank goodness I never see my HR person. I don't know my HR person. I'm not sure what they do. Oh, you mean the principal's office? These are literally the things that I've heard over the course of the last couple of years in regards to HR. And I think that while there's a place, of course, for being able to be compliant and having some organizational controls in place, there's also an and from an HR perspective. That's where we're going to spend the time today, talking about that and. Hopefully it's a secret sauce, but maybe it's not. The core HR functions, these are my definition of them, if you will, versus you can Google this and you'll find anywhere from 5 different to 12 different plus types of functions within HR. But how many of you have heard the fact that your work is like a family? Anyway, that term is becoming less of a term to use, for lack of a better term. And when I think about the current state of work and moving forward in the workplace, I tend to use the word community. And so it's that community and being intentional about the community that you're creating, not just your employees, but any partners that you're bringing in from a vendor perspective, who you're outsourcing with, and what by way of extension they offer to your organization, not because they are impacted directly or indirectly by the work that you're doing in the organization. So community, I look at it as a much more holistic function that we have from an HR perspective. Moving to the rewards, this is one. How many people have made a hiring decision and ballparked what they thought the salary would be, maybe adjusted, gave variable comp, maybe gave some options, whatever the case may be, but really didn't think about what that looks like when you're employee number 1 versus what you look like at employee number 10, 20. How does that initial comp offering align with your strategy? moving into the next block of learning, kind of going diagonal here. Um, Most organizations that I know want to be continuously learning. They want to be innovative. Most employees want to have developmental opportunities. And so that learning environment and taking that into an organization and again, making that part of the ecosystem is truly, I think, an area that leads to the bottom line of retention. If you're able to hire and select the right people, bring them in, reward them appropriately, keep them in a learning environment, that should trigger retention process. And I'm not talking about retention that we've heard about lately, quiet quitting, where people come in and do the bare minimum. I'm talking about an environment where people feel that they can thrive. That's a Gallup term in terms of engagement, but feel that they can produce information, that they can share information, that they have a voice. All of this ties to organizational alignment. This is something more than just culture. Culture, if you're in an organization, and especially the size of the organization, there can be subcultures. So one leadership might have this type of activity, but the overall culture is a little bit nuanced as you go down the organization. And frequently what the result of that is what I would call organizational, it's a term, but organizational alignment. So do your policies, do your practices, do your norms, do the unwritten rules that you have in your organization support the mission and ultimately the strategy that you're trying to do to grow. And this is where I think there's opportunities in HR. So it's not just the outsourced payroll processes, it's not just the compliance pieces, it's not just the handbook, but it's really thinking about the ecosystem as a whole and how these all pull together in order to support growth. And in thinking of this, I really wanted to, I'm a big person on
Hey,
data,
Danielle, before you,
yeah,
Danielle, before you go
yeah.
on to that, two questions that might be related. You mentioned the family community piece.
Mhm.
Um, and if this fits later, let me know. So often I hear folks in organizations say they have to be really careful not to create good relationships at work. Yet the surveys and engagement surveys tend to say that people feel most engaged when they feel like they've got good friends at work. What's sort of the conflict there, and where's that moving in our people world today?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, to your point, the data points point to that if you have meaningful relationships in the workplace, you're going to be more engaged in work, which then triggers other things. You know, to me, it's a meshing. Feel free to utilize words because my wordsmithing is not coming along right now. But when I think back to my father, he went to work, he came home from work, he didn't do work at home. It was a different time, it was a different place. If he went on vacation, there was not even a chance that really he had the opportunity to work. Um, Today's day and age, I think for the most part, we're gone. Many of us choose to work during vacation because it helps to not come back to things. And so I think that has an impact in terms of being able to separate out from that family type of relationship and looking at there is an inherent I say tension, maybe it's not tension, but when between employees and employers, they in fact can make decisions that impact your livelihood, impact your family, impact your benefits. So from a family perspective, that kind of makes it a little bit more challenging. But having good relationships in the workplace, how many times have you come out of an interview and said, I like that person? Nothing about the skills, nothing about the ability, but I could see myself working with that person. And so I think that that maybe it's not a distinction per se, but I think that is the realization of kind of the current workplace and that we're looking to be able to come into work and work with people that we enjoy, that we have good relationships with, maybe not a family though.
Awesome. Second question, because you're getting into these frameworks and values, I'm guessing anybody that hears this, one thought they have will have or have had is this. Hey, I'm an early stage company. I don't have to worry about people issues until I get to a certain size. So because you work with both some larger organizations, but early stage, what's sort of the message you give them around, can it be too early? And when should they really start looking at these strategic issues?
Yeah. My sense is, and thank you for asking that, because my sense is that most people that have started a business in some way, shape, or form have done HR functions. So they may have hired somebody, they might have fired somebody, they may have disciplined somebody, they may have had some experience in maybe not creating the comp plan, but some of those things. And so when you're in the early stages of starting a business, it makes sense to say, hey, I don't have to outsource that function. I don't have to find a partner in the HR perspective because I know how to do these things. I've done them before. And while that may in fact be true, the point that with the framework and all of the rest of these pieces is we spend time on the marketing plan. We spend time on looking at forecasting and revenue. We spend time in XYZ. I think it makes sense to spend time thinking about how we align the, the, the support functions of people to make sure that we are able to grow. So it is thinking about those distinct things. And if you don't do it at the beginning stages, then you're constantly retrofitting. And I see that with companies now. Their early employees were brought in with a lot of equity. Their new employees don't have any equity, and they want the CEO wants all employees to work, take ownership in the organization. Well, it's a little bit harder when not everybody has equity in the organization, and some people do. And so to point fingers at them. And so just thinking about those types of decisions and how they might play out, maybe in years, or maybe in hires, or maybe in growth. So did I answer the question in there, or did I kind of lose myself? Like
Thank
Eminem.
Thanks.
Welcome. So getting into the 5C framework, this is I keep forgetting the name of this company in Colorado, so I'll have to, when I find it again. But this company worked with Gallup to be able to look at thousands of companies over the course of 10 plus years. Companies that started off as solo entrepreneurs or one or two partnerships and then grew to have those pieces that I noted in there. They have economic impact, they have job creation, and they have personal satisfaction for those that are involved in it from an ownership perspective. And there was 5 conditions that were in play for these companies that had successfully sustained 10 plus years of revenue growth. And so I'm going to go into these. And and I'll be tying it more, of course, to the HR side of things, the people side of things, but inherently most of these functions had people relationships in there. So alignment, does this company have the ability to grow? Discipline, how do we make sure that we're revenue is going up more so than the expenses and the cost? Performance, and if you're just starting out in business and you're like, what's my revenue going to be next year? I don't know. But once you get more mature, it's basically using that information to benchmark and make wise decisions within the organization. Endurance, the people that you have, how do you make sure that they're able to mentally sustain being in a startup? It's not easy. Being in a company that's growing, not easy. It's fun and exciting, but it goes to pull people down. So making sure that psychological connection, and then value, putting it all together. We have consistent year over year growth in revenue and headcount. And the first one, as we're going to go into each of these, being able to outline a vision and outline path helps to create that organizational alignment. I keep saying organizational because that's the word, but ultimately this is, again, one of the conditions of success for companies that have been profitable in over a 10-year period, small companies. One of the things that is apparent in these organizations is almost 40% of the owners or the founders have used talent as part of their core strategy. So from the initial get-go, they were building in a talent strategy, building in that ecosystem to support their people, nearly 40%. So, again, longer term, these are some of the things that are important to them. The other piece they were looking at is making sure that they were managing the levels of bureaucracy. Gary Hamel is a great one in terms of humanocracy, and he has this, it's basically a traditional organizational chart which shows, 15, 20 different layers. And they were calling it hieroglyphics, basically. What is that? Most organizations, you have to have decision-making power. You have to have people in leadership, but making sure that you're not just adding structure or adding layers to add layers. So those two components really were part of the people sort of things from an alignment perspective. And I'm going to weave stories with one of my previous employers, IMG Academy, throughout these things, just to kind of give a little bit of color to that. When I got to IMG, I worked across the organization to be able to talk to the leaders, talk to our people, be able to understand some of the things that were blocking them from being successful. The two patterns that were the most prolific were we need help, like we feel that we're understaffed, and B, do you hire people that like kids? And I was like, ooh, if you've ever been on IMG campus or you know anything about them, there's kids everywhere. It's a boarding school for student athletes. So the fact that those two things came up indicated to me that we had a lot of work to do. It was work that we had an opportunity to change. But my hypothesis was, if we hired people that were interested in what we were doing and that believed in the mission and the vision of what we were trying to achieve, the ability for us to feel understaffed would probably be minimized. It wouldn't go away, but if you're working together in a team, again, that's pulling for the same thing, it helps. People that don't want to come into work that are coming into work tend to not go over and above. So from an alignment perspective, looking at, are we making talent a core strategy and how are we minimizing things? The second one that they've identified as a condition to success in small companies that have sustainable growth and profit in 10 plus years is discipline. And I kind of wrestled with this word a little bit because discipline to me, I'm so used to saying disciplinary action up to and including termination. Said it for 25 years now. It's not a fun thing. But when I think about discipline in the way that they measured it from a Gallup perspective, it's clarity on roles and expectations and safeguarding employee and assets. The clarity on role and expectations, the thing that they found that companies, the correlated pattern to this was if companies had performance review processes. Almost 40% of the successful companies that had high performing teams in sustainability had a performance review process in there. Now, I wrestle with that a little bit, and I'll tell you why. I don't think if you just put in a performance review process, that does not mean you're going to be successful. I think it's really about being able to create a culture that mimics a team or an environment in which you're getting continuous feedback so that you can either take that feedback and apply it or take that feedback and say, And Marcus Buckingham, who wrote a book, The 9 Lies of Work, I think that's what it's called, used this illustration. And I think it's for me, it's a powerful one. So feel free to let me know if this doesn't connect with you. But Lionel Messi, he's a soccer player, hanging out in Miami right now, pretty big deal. But there's a sequence that Marcus Buckingham showed where Lionel Messi got the ball down at the end of his goaltender, took the ball all the way up and scored a goal. In that sequence, it's not about teamwork, it's not about passing, it's really his approach to that. It was basically 10 touches on his left foot to 1 touch on his right foot. And if you're a coach and you see that, if you're a manager and you see that, that's not how you're going to tell people how to carry the ball forward. Now that he's Messi, nobody's going to be trying to coach that, but it goes into, clarity on role expectations, performance review process, our ability to rate others. I don't know what happened if Messi just didn't listen to his coach back in there and persisted, or if the coach, tried to just encourage him to do that. But I think the important lesson to be able to take into an organization is when we're rating other people, we're using our shared experiences, we're using our knowledge, we're using our path to be able to potentially direct others. That may be absolutely fine, but Jeff might have a significantly different way to get to the same thing and still put the ball in the net. And so thinking about that and adding discipline into the processes so that you're safeguarding your employees and assets, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but also being able to continuously provide clarity on where we're going as a team, where you're going as an individual, and how you're being able to assist with that. So I'll pause there because I'm looking somewhere around the room a little bit and see some questions, but maybe not.
I had a question.
I saw that.
Yeah, I think this is the right place. You talked about the importance of feedback. And, when I talk to companies at all different sizes, I pretty typically hear that they either will say we could do a lot better or we stink at feedback. And there's a whole thing about they talk about they need better accountability. They wish they could do a better job with feedback. And I find that part of that is I think people and leaders and organizations are terrified to have a conversation with people about expectations and when they're meeting them or when they're not. So how much of this would you say is systematic? We don't have a good system for it. And how much is more that interpersonal challenge of having these honest conversations?
Uh, Let me think. My belief is that frequently when organizations get to some type of scale, some type of size, we start to box in and where conversations and how conversations should be had. So whether it's through a performance review process or whether it's through, here's the cycles for disciplinary action if you're not performing there. Here's what you can talk about at work and here's what you can't. I think there's a lot of things, especially with the size of the organization, that starts to hold people back from these conversations. And it's not easy, but focusing on performance. If you're 3 people, if you're 5 people, if you're 20 people, if you're 80 people, to me, you have an opportunity to really, again, going back to the ecosystem of what we're trying to develop from a people perspective, how do you build those in place where you can have conversations that are, I'm digressing a little bit, but the term radical transparency has come up frequently. Well, you can be radically transparent, but you can be a real jerk about how you approach that, And so I think a lot of it has to do with intent, and realizing that not all feedback needs to land. Way back when, I remember, I was in Philly and I felt like everybody was yelling at me just because of the tone of voice, and giving lots of feedback. And, at the end of the day, one of my directors was basically like, look, take the feedback, put it into 3 buckets. Either it's applicable and you don't care, or it's not applicable. But the point of this, to come back to the question, Jeff, is I think this is where it's super important, or really important, to be able to be thoughtful about the organizational alignment and hence the culture that you're creating around feedback. We all say that we want feedback until we sometimes get feedback and then we're like, no, I don't want that. So how do we put that into place where we're systematically doing that? And really, they've said some magic. Research shows that peer-to-peer feedback can actually be the most effective. And so if you can put parameters in place where you're giving feedback to peers, that's a good way to capitalize and help people grow. So that's my performance. Got the little pieces on that. And, ultimately, these 3 things together allow organizations to start making better decisions with in terms of how they're going to grow, where they're going to grow, and so on and so forth. And again, I'll just weave this back to IMG, just a shorter story, because I want to make sure that I put this all together. But performance, we were growing as an organization, and one of the investments that we made was in somebody that does revenue growth, specific revenue growth, a small revenue team. I literally didn't even know what that meant, but essentially it was pulling from an airline type of model. So you look at where capacity is, where you're under capacity, and you start to make decisions, and it starts to affect pricing and things like that. What the ability to be able to have that financial decision making, we're a bigger company at this point in time, but it allowed us to believe in those decisions that we were making. It allowed us to look at the practices that we were making. It allowed us to believe in that financial data because the proof was in the pudding. The revenue started growing. We started to see better increases in the programs. People started to feel that. So really from a performance standpoint, it's putting these three things together, and you can't do that without people. Yeah, you have to have trust in there, which want to touch on this right at this point in time. This is Gallup data from, if I want to tie this back a little bit to what you said, 13% of people in the workforce believe that we communicate effectively as an organization. 21% of people in the workforce trust leadership, and 24% believe in the decision making. You know, if we could reverse those numbers, like, can you imagine how organizations, and maybe to be fair, maybe we would still be with organizations if that was the case. Maybe we wouldn't be entrepreneurs, but nonetheless, this is the model that we have, that we're used to, what it leads to. Um, you know, and so there's a lot of people feel that they're doing that. It's one of the other data points is 87% believe that they're self-aware. Only, I think it's less than 15% of the population is what they would call self-aware. So if I'm in a leadership position and I'm thinking that I'm communicating on a regular basis, I'm communicating often, I'm communicating clearly, really stress test that. And that's where I think good HR partners can come into play on that. It doesn't have to be HR, but to be able to really be a mirror and say what we're doing is not actually leading us to the things. And unless we want to get to our organization to have these low numbers, let's think about ways that we can use the conditions that have been outlined to be able to make some difference in the organizations that we're at. Endurance is the last one before we kind of get to the value pieces. And I think maybe I live by these numbers, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to go out on my own. 68% of people don't feel actively engaged. And when it's active engagement, it's not about checking the box on that. It's not about an employee engagement survey that comes out and you're like, wow, our population's engaged. It's about really feeling connected to the work, feeling that you understand what the mission is, feeling that you're able to do your best work on a regular basis, feeling that the organization cares about you, and to Jeff's point, feeling that you actually care about the relationships within your work. Those factors come together in order to trigger the engagement piece. And when engagement is up, productivity is up, performance is up, revenues are up. What else is that? All those drivers are up, and what's down is absenteeism, safety incidents, things of that nature. So there's a lot of things that are tied to this, but being able to pull it all together is not as easy. And to touch on this again, just for a little bit more, these are is anybody familiar with the career, social, financial, physical, and community, what that is? That is how Gallup defines, if you will, in the buckets for employee well-being. And in the past, I don't even know, 5 years, maybe give or plus, it might be a little bit more, employee well-being is increasingly coming into ties with engagement. If your employees feel that they're cared for at work, if their well-being is taken care of, again, those drivers that you're looking for out of your team tend to go up. So career, do I like what I do? Social, do I care about the people that I'm working with? Financial, this is not about the company financial, but this is about I'm comfortable with the financial decisions that I'm making and things of that nature. Physical, I feel like I can come to work every day. In the community, I like the community that I'm in. And as we've gotten away from some of the things that I heard about when I was a kid, pensions, we've gotten away from things. Being able for employers to think about this and be able to tailor programs, again, behooves them in the long run because it helps the business grow.
Hey, Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
In this concept of well-being, the phrase that I'm hearing a lot and I'm reading a lot about in context of our people is the importance of psychological safety and the impact that has on engagement and all the things that flow from engagement. where would that fit in the Gallup model here?
I'm sorry, I'm Jeff. Either I cut out or you cut out, but I missed the end of that question. So the
Oh, yeah,
psychological safety.
where does psychological safety fit in this model for Gallup?
Psychologically safety, from my perspective, would be if all of these components are working together, you're going to feel psychologically safe within the environment.
Gotcha.
There's different models that will peel that out. But again, I like to go to the model where there's more independent research and years of research on that.
Got
So,
you. Thank you.
okay, sure thing. And moving into the last piece of that is the value creation. And I'm really going to try, hopefully, to be able to tie some of this together, because if you're still like, I still want an HR, whatever, like, you know, going back to the pieces that I've shared with IMG, you know, creating alignment. Alignment started when we had a new managing director come in, and he was there for about a year and a half before I did. And what he did was he changed basically the business model for IMG. And so many people knew IMG from Andre Agassi and people like that being able to come there and then move into the pros. Well, the model that we moved to was ultimately we're here for student athletes to be able to put kind of the pillars education in terms of traditional education or sport as an educational component, and then kind of well-being activities that would touch on some of those social, physical, things that we spoke about in the last one. So that was the catalyst of it. That was the vision. And we sharing what I shared earlier, we were not hiring to that vision. Granted that had changed. So one of the things that we did from an HR perspective is we developed a recruiting strategy that would align with that. We went out and hired people that liked kids, which kind of sounds a little weird when you say it. But anyway, it was important. And then we also went out and made sure that we had a population that mirrored our student population, which was almost 60% international. They were coming from all over the world. We did a lot of which many entrepreneurs do, hiring friends and family. And that's how we grow. We like this person, so we want to do that. And so really being much more intentional about the practice of who we were bringing in as we were aligned with the organization. From a discipline standpoint, we talk a little bit about some of the policies and procedure pieces, things that we need to safeguard the employees, and one of the things that I would typically do is be able to share kind of the employee handbook. And most people, their eyes literally roll back in their head when you talk about the employee handbook. But really, how do we bring that to life? How do we create a culture where we're talking a little bit more about some of the things that are important to people? And what always stood out was when I would do the non-harassment policy. I don't know of any organization that will not have that type of policy on campus, but when I would talk about it, ultimately 3 questions. 1, have you ever felt uncomfortable at work from the words, actions, or behavior of somebody else? Number 2, have you witnessed something which made somebody feel uncomfortable at work, words, actions, behaviors? And number 3, if so, have you let somebody in a leadership position know that was a problem? And most people would be yes, yes, and then no at the end. And they wouldn't raise our hands and things like that. But really, that was, to me, one of the things that we had to get better at as an organization. We had to make sure that if you saw or felt something, it doesn't mean that the end reaction was going to be a termination or anything like that, but we've got to be able to figure that out. And so the last question that we would try to plant the seeds early is, if your behavior is impacting or your words are impacting somebody, do you want to know about it? And the answer is generally yes. And so thinking about how you can thread the ecosystem together to be able to create the organizational alignment that you want. Jeff, did you have a question? I'm watching you're just below me, so I see your face more frequently.
I do. Well, actually, Josh asked a question that's been in the chat about
Okay.
taking another look at the endurance slide. He didn't get all of that. I'm not sure if he wanted to go
Yeah.
through it all.
Well, and we can
Review.
send this out too, right?
Yeah, the slide will go out with the recording. Your call. I'm
Yeah.
addressing it now.
No, that's fine. Good, Josh. Uh, performance, I'm not going to stand long on this one, but one of the things, as I talked about earlier, with bringing in the rev department to be able to really be able to create accurate and reliable data that we can make decisions on, there was a byproduct of this that you could feel in the organization. So prior to these kind of measures all being put into place for our people to help drive the growth of the company, uh, everybody was in silos. Sports departments didn't talk to other sports departments, athletics didn't talk to education, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of disparate systems going on, and through working through these things, you would literally see and feel the difference on campus. People would be talking to each other from lunch perspective. You would see different sports interacting with each other, and they were sharing ideas, like brainstorming, and then so there was just this wonderful energy that comes from those types of things. The endurance piece that we had was, we got to a point where we were probably 2 or 3, maybe it was 2.5 years in, and we started losing some of those people that we had brought into the organization. I was doing exit interviews. It was super painful for me to be able to say, these people that we worked so hard to bring in, that we thought were going to be so successful, are leaving now. And my boss at that time said, all right, Danielle, go figure it out. And that to me was one of the best processes I've ever had. Was I was able to go out and say, talk to our people. And then we identified a bunch of key areas that were important to our staff and our team, our community. And we started to put action item those. So we got more involved in the community through community events, through community cleanups, through opening up our campus doors. We started developmental opportunities for our team that were different than what we had already offered. We started different recognition programs, so there was these pieces that we pulled together that were direct impact for, again, trying to align the strategy of what we were trying to do to achieve growth, to being able to make sure that our people were there. And the last part of this, I'll just say, from a value standpoint, in some ways you might be thinking, IMG, it's a for-profit educational institution. I'm sure it was easy to be able to do some of these things because you had resources. We were a oddity in terms of the portfolio. We were owned by venture capitalists. And so it's not easy to do this, but what we did and what we were able to achieve, and this is a big we, I mean, granted, I gave myself and the team that we worked with from an HR perspective, and being able to create an ecosystem that supported that growth, led to year after year after year after year growth. We achieved things that we were not, that astounded ourselves. And it was, there's times where it was really exhausting to do that, but there was times where it was a lot of fun and you really worked together as a team. So, when you think about human resources, again, my experience has been that sometimes people think of it more as a transactional thing, an operational thing, and not thinking about it from how you build an ecosystem to not only support your team for where they are today, where you want to go tomorrow, but thinking about it from the longer position. And most of the time, it's rare when I talk to a leader who has the time, energy, and effort to really be able to think about this from a holistic standpoint. But not only that, there's blind spots that you have. Again, going back to the communication, I think if we reverse engineered that and asked leaders if they communicated well, they would probably say yes. But their team's not feeling it. So being able to be that person that does that. So I just, when you think about where you are as a company, where you want to go, I encourage you to talk to somebody from an HR perspective, somebody that thinks about people in a way that maybe you don't, that thinks about the impact of decisions that you're making today and what they do a couple of years out, and not from a compliance risk standpoint per se. We have to think, has to be considered, but really, how do we create an environment where our people, our community, are helping us grow and helping us achieve that, and not coming into work and just doing the bare minimum. So I'll pause there. How am I doing on time? Pretty good.
You got 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, literally that, I mean, that that is the piece that I think hopefully is the secret sauce. It's apparent to me to what it can do, but it's also something that I think is super important for organizations to think about as they continue to move forward. And if you really want to achieve that success, the 5 conditions have been researched, looked at, and many of them tied to levers that you're pulling from a people standpoint and how your people can either help you stay complacent or can help you grow based on the ecosystem that you're designing.
Danielle, a question I have, because I see this regularly, and you know this. In my opinion, and unfortunately, HR and HR people, as you said, not necessarily viewed as exciting. And in a company, and I'm going to just use the word that make you cringe, they see HR as an overhead that doesn't add value to the company dollar wise. How would you help leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs start to see some of the financial benefits of this versus just saying this is what we've got to do because we've got people?
Uh, you broke up in the middle again. Maybe it was just me, but
No, it's probably me. I've been
okay.
hearing that happen.
Okay. So what was the middle piece of that? So
Well, just sort of how do we translate as leaders the concept of HR into what are the financial returns we get from this versus this is great and so conceptually, because I think so often if we can't find some money in this, we tend to put it over to the side.
mhm. Yeah, it's almost and part of this, I think, and again, why I try to root this in data is going back to the this is rooted in research that shows success in companies. Now, that being said, um, I do understand like we're a cost center in many occasions, but change that leadership. Like if we want to go to be a 5 million, 10 million, 20, whatever the place may be, if you don't have a strategy that supports your people, you may get there, but it's probably not going to be as quickly as you want to or as aligned as you want to. And if I'm not answering the question directly, but I really think it is talking to individuals who are making these decisions and being able to show, if this is where you want to go, here's some of the things that we need to be thinking about from a people perspective. And maybe there's disbelief, maybe there's doubt, but the success of companies, they'll frequently say it, will frequently say it, our people are my most important thing.
Yeah.
But we don't intentionally design our organizations so that they feel that support in the areas that we know. We have the research, we have the data, we have models that we know somewhat work, we have models that we know don't work. But I think, given the entrepreneurs and the end goal, starting those conversations sooner rather than later and making sure that, you're the person that you're partnering with on this perspective understands where you're trying to go. The other piece, I think about the difference, and this is a little segue, so apologize for that. But over the course of the last year, it's probably been longer than that, but in roles in organizations, whether it's the unwritten norms and things like that, from an HR perspective, I'll just talk it from that because it's probably broader than this, but you can make recommendations to the organization. You can say things that aren't the things that you think will be most important to the company moving forward. And what happens is you start to get a little bit conditioned, right? That's that psychologically safetiness of it. And so we start to not tend to tell things that we need or that will help or that will align the company. And that's because that relationship, that person has the power to be able to take away our pay, to take away our job, to take away our healthcare. And so that's one of the things that I just think, especially as people are growing and setting up things, having a partner is independent of the organization but understands and wants to align with the mission, could be a really critical factor in helping people grow and scale and be successful in the long term.
Well, I do have If there are any other questions, great. I do have one more question, but you know me, I got lots of questions. If someone else has got a question, go ahead and raise your hand and open up your mic. Okay. So here's my question. I don't think you've used this word today, Danielle,
Okay.
and feel free to put the other slides up, those contact
Yeah.
slides. This topic today, we call it secret sauce. And a few years ago on a podcast, I was interviewing a gentleman who had founded a company from scratch, had grown it to 1,000 people, 100% remote, and they had built an incredible culture. Just incredible. Everybody agreed, people that work there. They did all the things you're saying. And and the I asked him, I said, is there a secret sauce? And his answer was, there is actually. He said, two things have been our secret sauce. One is we invite our people to bring their personal lives to work. We don't separate them. And number two, starting with me and all the leaders in the organization have to model vulnerability, because he said vulnerability is the shortcut to trust. And he said that's the secret sauce. And we built all these systems and did the thing. So can you talk about uh, that, the role of vulnerability in this, people building our people and all of that?
Yeah. I, I let me try to be succinct. There's so many different holes in terms of leadership, culture, organizations. I mean, we have tried to codify culture throughout multiple books. We've tried to codify leadership in multiple ways, and vulnerability is one of those where it is a word that is increasingly more important or becoming more visible in terms of, as a leadership, as a team, as a culture, you need to be vulnerable. My hesitation on some of these things is how, I also think we need you to be you. And if you're, this term is often used, if you're inauthentic with your approach and you're trying to pull in a vulnerability direction because you think that that's what your people want or need, that can also create disruption. So there's a part of it where, how how do we, I'll go back to what I say this all the time. So those of you, the friends that kind of on the group, but we don't intentionally try to show up in a workplace to be a jerk or to be hurt other people but what is it about me? What is it about Jeff? What is it about Josh, Oscar, Cynthia? Those are my names that makes you, kind of the cliched best version of yourself. And vulnerability to me in the workplace is also just being more open, sharing things there. You as a leader, you, in my opinion, much more stoic, and you couldn't show that you had all this stuff in the background that, it doesn't whatever stop at the end of the door, home and work. And so I just think that there's different interpretations of these words, but it's really in how do we show up in a way that is true to ourselves, and amplifies the kind of the gifts that we're able to give to other people. And if you're trying to do too many things that you're not, I think that leads to what I would go into that organizational alignment. I'm claiming I'm vulnerable, but I don't know. It's not showing up to anybody that I work with.
Okay.
So it wasn't an answer per se, it was a perspective.
Well, I don't know that there is an answer on that. I agree with you. It is such a, it seems to be probably at the top of the list of conversations that I see and read about, and something that comes up in talking to team members regularly. And I also have found that for the leaders, the organizational positional leaders, it's a very terrifying topic because there's still this perception that that openness and all that is this can be perceived as a weakness. And there's this
Mm.
fear of it coming across weak. And I think we're going through a generational shift because as you pointed out, you talked about your father, and I look at my father and I look at what I grew up in the workplace, and there was none of this conversation. And it's coming, but I think like a lot of things, it takes some generations to move past the way we used to do things with our people.
Yeah.
I have a quick
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, Josh.
Can you hear me all right? So first off, I love this last point about vulnerability. I think also in sales and marketing and in general relationships in general, you're you being vulnerable allows a quicker connection and a more meaningful connection just between whatever entity or realm you're operating in. So this last portion was really hit home for me because I feel like I don't want to wear a mask and be two different people in any scenario. So I just am, and it actually works out pretty well. But my question is, and first off, this has been really great information and inspiring, and it's got me thinking. So I'm a small but mighty operation. I have two full timers and really one other dedicated contractor and a couple other like here and there contractors. So obviously not an enormous team. We do a lot of work. And right now I'm still getting my bearings on revenue, consistent cash flow. And I'm wondering like what are the indicators that I should be looking for? And obviously, Danielle, we can talk about this more in detail about my company, but maybe for other people, like looking for the indicators of when should I be seriously thinking about bringing on someone like yourself and onto my team and in starting to integrate HR on a serious level formally, being small, what should I look out for? And okay, it's time.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. My son's, or what I'd like to recommend to people is starting sooner rather than later. And it doesn't have to be, again, that the engagement can be different based on the person that you are working with, but it does make sense. Again, think about from a marketing plan perspective. Okay, if we want to achieve XYZ, how are we going to do that? And there's generally milestones and triggers that you're going to create that. If we want to achieve this from a people perspective, not even from a people, but if we want our people to achieve this, what are some of the ways that we're going to do this that are authentic to you in your organization that makes sense, because that might not be the same thing for a different organization. So and of course I'm selfishly like, I think it's important to start that conversation soon. Here's the direction that we want to go. Here are the things that are important to us. Here's the things that we're thinking of, and then map that to the functional areas of that. It doesn't mean you need somebody on a regular basis. It could be, once a year type of conversation. The engagement could look a little bit different, but it will get you to start to think about the kind of company that you want to continue to create and continue to have as you build out and as you grow your soon to be mightier team that's not as small.
Thanks for that. Well, then I guess maybe we need to meet and just have an initial meeting and talk about some details then. Thanks, Danielle.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Danielle. Thanks everybody for being here. As I said at the beginning, we recorded this, and hopefully by the end of the day, if not today, tomorrow, Danielle, if you would share your slides with me so I can send them out to everybody, and I'll send out a link to the recording along with the slides, as well as a link to Danielle and her contact information. And we would love to hear your feedback. There'll also be a brief survey opportunity there. Thank you for being here. Keep your eyes and ears open for what's next. And typically we're doing these about every 3 or 4 weeks. And please let us also know if there's any topics that you'd love to hear more about. So thanks for being here, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.